Awesome. Welcome, everybody, to Summer Splash. Set your net nonprofit up for fall grant success in under 60 minutes. We will probably cover most of this in the next 50 minutes or so, but if you have any questions along the way, do feel free to include 3 hashtags in front of them as well as your question. That way, it's a little bit easier to spot. And in the meantime, I will go ahead and share the Zoom poll results as well. But if you haven't already and you want to share in the Zoom chat, your name, your organization, as well as what you do for your nonprofit or how familiar you are with Instrumentl, along with how many workshops you've been to lifetime. That would be super useful. In the meantime, I'm going to share what folks that were earlier to the room were answering, which is what their least favorite part of the grant application is to write. The winner for today is future funding, sustainability, and the budget side of things. So there are a couple folks, though, that also did answer other. If you did answer other, I'd love to hear from you in the chat. What did you mean to write in terms of if you did select that option? And then the second question for today is how many people help you with grant writing? 21% of you were just working on it yourself, very common for smaller organizations. And then 59% of you had 1 or 2 people working on it, with the remainder of you guys falling into the 3 or 4 people range. So that'll be super useful for you as we kind of dig into some of the frameworks and things like that that we'll dig into in today's presentation. But thanks so much for being part of that little poll to kick things off there. I'll have a couple more polls, and I do want to make sure that this is as interactive as possible for you guys throughout. And so definitely, if you didn't make it to this first poll, try to make it to the next ones as we keep working our way through the workshop today. And I'm seeing Farrell's talking about the procrastination of others. That's totally fair. Writing proposals is definitely something in which there are many people and many parties involved here. But for those of you that do not know me, my name is Will. We regularly host grant workshops with expert educators and best-selling authors. Celia actually has put into the Zoom chat as well our upcoming events calendar in the case where you've never joined one of these workshops before and it's the first one of these that you've done. We provide all of these workshops for free to the community, and we showcase a variety of different partners around their grant expertise and general nonprofit expertise. And what Instrumentl does is we help over 2,000 nonprofits in finding, tracking, and managing their grants all in one place. So every single day we see and we hear about what blocks nonprofits from achieving their grant-seeking goals. So what I want to hear from you in the Zoom chat is if any of these particular scenarios resonate with you. You can just give me like your favorite emoticon when you hear it, or maybe what you're feeling as you kind of see me like walk through these scenarios. And then that way we can kind of get a sense of where everybody's coming in at and what they're coming in at for this respective workshop. So maybe you're in a situation where your nonprofit struggles when it comes to consistently finding good fit funders for your mission. I know this is a common pain point for those teams out there that are, only 1 or 2 people, and you've definitely got a lot on your plate already. It's not just grant writing in a lot of situations. Your ED has a ton of other fundraising initiatives that you're asking for. Catherine's giving me a yes. Or maybe you're in a situation where you spend hours every day double checking funder deadlines and guidelines to ensure you haven't, missed a change. And you just find yourself having to put a very concrete magnifying glass under every single thing like Detective Pikachu is doing over here. Or you might find yourself in a situation in which you feel ill-equipped when it comes to evaluating what grant tools will work best for your organization. I know some of you guys today, it's your first workshop here. You're still getting familiar with what Instrumentl and other tools can do as well. So you may not know exactly, what you should be looking for when you are assessing the different tools for yourself. Well, you don't need to worry, because over the next hour, what we're going to cover is all of these bases. Ultimately, our goal today is to help this become you, which is, as one customer shared with us, at this point, they invest 30 minutes a week reviewing their matches, and they're fairly confident that they don't miss any important RFPs. Thanks to Instrumentl, they're able to discover and win a $50,000 grant that they wouldn't have otherwise found, and we're totally worth the investment. And whether you end up using us today, or you already use us, or you're using some other tool, hopefully what you'll leave with in terms of the framework that I'll go over in the final section of today's workshop is some considerations of how you can raise the bar of what you expect from like the grant tooling that you're selecting. Something else to remember as you go through this is that grants are worth it. There are over 87,000 grant-making foundations, including 12,000 active grants on Instrumentl alone, and we're actively adding 100 every single week. So Our agenda for today is as follows. What we're going to first talk about is the important framework that I want you to keep in mind when you think about what are the must-haves for maximizing your grant success in the fall or in any other season in the year. We're going to talk about how to get a personalized list of good fit funders. I know we've got a couple customers in the room, so bear with me during that section. But for folks that are newer to us on Instrumentl, we will help you set up a list of personalized good fit funders. That way you can use that list coming out of this workshop and start working on your grants. And then we're also going to talk about how to stay on top of important grant deadlines for single and multi-step applications. And then finally, we're going to wrap up by talking about how you can understand how to evaluate what grant tools are going to work best for your organization. That way, the next time that your executive director is asking you, hey, what do you think we should use next year in terms of staying organized with all of your grants, you're going to have a more clear answer in terms of what are the criteria that my organization cares about and what should we prioritize in our budget cycle in the year ahead. Be sure to stick until the end for a special limited time offer at the end of this workshop. It is going to be an offer that's limited by the number of people that use it as well as the time duration. So I'll share more details on that a little bit later. And we'll also have 3 hours of on-demand courses available for people that submit the feedback form at the end of today's workshop. All right, so let's first dig into the 3 must-haves when it comes to grant success. Ultimately, when talking about what's really important in scaling your grant strategy, I like to think of things in the context of the PPT framework. If you've ever heard of this framework, I'd love to hear from you in the chat below. But if you haven't, that's cool too. I'm about to go over it. So the 3 must-haves for grant success really can be distilled down to this framework that's actually been around since the early 1960s and popularized in the late 1990s. And what the 3 components of that is people, process, and technology. And if you start to think about and your gears are turning in terms of what this might be related to, well, we're going to dig into exactly why each of these component parts is so important when it comes to making sure that your organization is positioned for success when it comes to your grants. So when you think about this, you really can think about it from the context of something like a 3-legged stool, right? In which when you have a 3-legged stool, you have people doing the work. And then that naturally leads to processes that help make the work more efficient, and then technology that helps automate that process, right? Because ultimately, no one's going to write your grant proposal automatically, or at least a computer can't do that today, not yet at least. And at the same time, you need to have the processes in place so that when it comes time to submitting particular proposals on time or making sure that you're tracking all the important things, that you're able to stay on top of that. And that's where that final component of technology helping automate that process becomes so important as well. And what you should think about when you think about it from the lens of this PPT framework is that really everything has to adapt to the current and the future problems of the organization, right? So everything can impact another aspect in that if you don't have the people in place, well, it doesn't matter if you have processes or technology. If you don't have the technology in place, it doesn't matter if you have the people and the processes because you're going to struggle in scaling. And so what I want you to think about right now is, how does this look in the context of a nonprofit? How do you think about the people, the process, or the technology that we're using? It doesn't even need to be just in the context of grants. I think you can actually apply this at a broader organizational level to think about just like, are we strategically allocating our resources and our bandwidth and positioning ourselves for success to our broader fundraising goals? So let's talk about what some of those implications are if you don't have one of these component parts, right? So the first thing that you might think about is, what will we find ourselves in if we don't have the people? Well, you're probably going to be asking questions like, how do we write the grants, right? How do we meet reporting requirements? How do we hold ourselves accountable? How do we ensure that our proposals reflect our organization's values? If there's no literal person vetting through and making sure that this grant is the good fit opportunity, well, then there's really no safeguard in terms of making sure that your reputation is being upheld, making sure that grant proposals are going out, and making sure that you're starting to build meaningful human-to-human conversations and relationships with foundations. And so people are obviously a really important part of the puzzle. At the same time, though, if we don't have process, we may find ourselves in a situation where we're asking ourselves, how can we possibly stay on top of our grant deadlines? There's way too many opportunities out there to pursue, way too many priorities that are, having to get juggled. And so as a result, you might find yourself in a situation where you don't know which grants to pursue versus which ones to ignore, because you don't have, for example, a decision-making matrix to help walk you through of which grants you should actively pursue, as well as which ones you should potentially pass on. And the bigger question when it comes to process, or the lack thereof of process, is really, how do you actually scale grant strategy, right? If you don't have a process in place for your grants, that's okay, but you should be building yourself towards having a process in place, because there's no way that you're going to get to a place where you're going to have, 10 or more grant applications going out regularly every single month if you haven't started to distill what that typical grant life cycle looks like and the component parts you need to actually get that proposal out the door. And then lastly, if we don't have the technology, well, then we have some challenges as well, because ultimately we're going to inevitably face something that is often faced in the grant writing world, which is staff writer burnout, right? Staff burnout. This is a post that if you go on Google and you search grant writer burnout, we have a great article where we have some helpful ways that you can combat burnout, but it's definitely something that organizations feel across the board. And again, you can apply this PPT framework in more than just one fundraising use case to grants, but also in broader fundraising. In the case where you are constantly running to the next sprint, for example, for an individual fundraising event, well, you're still going to face the same sort of challenge in terms of staff burnout, something where regardless of what industry or area that we're looking at from a work perspective, this is often a challenge that people have. And so they turn to technology in order to help combat that burnout, because technology can remove some of those administrative things that we all don't really like doing all that much. And then you may also think about, how we're going to actually stay organized across our organization. Earlier on in the poll, it looked like 21% of you have between 3 or 4 people that are working on grants. Well, how do you stay coordinated, especially in the world of potentially more remote work, in which the 3 or 4 of you are all working on different schedules, and maybe you're not seeing each other as often as you did before, right? And so this is something in which you're going to want to think about how you not only stay more organized, but also how you bolster collaboration across your stakeholders, right? And then ultimately, with that in mind, the last thing that really helps with technology is that you get leverage. You get the ability to achieve more with the same size team. If you use the right tools, you shouldn't necessarily need to always answer your bandwidth constraints from the perspective of having to budget for an entirely new full-time employee, but you can potentially solve it through the sorts of tools and resources and platforms that you're selecting. So now that I've gone through the PPT framework, what I'd like you to reflect on is, does your organization have all 3 of these must-haves? Or in reflection, are you stronger in one area than another? And I would love to hear in the chat as you type in your response here to this reflection question. And while you guys are doing that as well, I'm going to launch a second poll, which is where I'm going to ask you to tell us in the poll, where is your organization currently strongest? So go ahead and type that into the Zoom poll as well, and then type in your response to whether or not you are stronger in one area or another. Give folks a minute to catch up there. Yeah, Martha. So process is really talking about, okay, if I have found this short list of opportunities for grants, do I have a methodical process that I do over and over again, that whether it's me or somebody else that's working on grants on my team, I know, what decisions we typically make in assessing whether or not that is going to be a good opportunity. So it can be related to things like decision-making matrices. It can be related to the safety checks that we have in place for making sure that we have everything in place for all the pieces of the grant life cycle. So it can be like, every time that we are submitting for reporting, we have somebody in accounting look through this particular set of the grant proposal to just make sure that we're not, getting any numbers wrong. Or it's something in which, you always have in your process, your executive director sign off on every proposal before you send that out. Or when it comes to getting stellar support letters, you have every single quarter or every other quarter, you have a situation in which you're going to get a steady flow of new great support letters to include in your proposals, because you've built up some sort of system with your organization that works for you in order to replicate that sort of result, right? And so it's really taking what the people might know and working that into a standard operating procedure, like a manual and a process, right? So I'm seeing that Sergio is talking about how he's stronger in people, definitely developing process and looking for technology. Farrell's talking about how people is definitely number one, technology is number two, and then process number three. Awesome. And so as I share these results, I'll give folks another minute or two to answer, since it looks like a couple folks are still responding. But what I want you to think about is, what happens when you have one of these components that's really strong? How can you really lean into your strength while continuing to kind of gradually build in the other sides of support that you might be looking for, whether that's the people, the process, or the technology side of things? For folks that are earlier on in their nonprofit journey, you might still be trying to figure out the people question, in which you don't have a full-time grant writer. You're trying to just get everybody on board there and find the right talent there. So I'm going to share these poll results here. But as you can see, 65% of you are saying you're strongest in the people. And that makes sense, because the sort of people that would be signing into this workshop are people that are looking to make sure that they're staying on the ball with respect to the best grant writing practices and things like that. And so it's great to see you guys live in the room today. But notice how, really only 16% of you are saying that process is something that you're strongest in, or 18% of you are saying technology is the area that you're strongest in, right? And so what that should kind of tell you from just the 50 or so people that have responded here is that we're all kind of in the same place. It's something in which you have a situation where you shouldn't feel like you're behind or necessarily ahead, and that's okay. But what that means is that as we kind of run through the different things that you can do with your teams, what I want you to think about is how can you potentially start to strengthen some of the processes and the technology. And we'll talk about that when we start to dig into the grants calendar component of this workshop, as well as when we start to talk about the considerations that you'll need to make when you are considering which technology tools to use for you. So really, the reason why I like to start with this framework here is because these three must-haves are pretty much at the core of what we've built with Instrumentl. We have built Instrumentl specifically for the purposes of addressing and supporting people, process, and technology. We mostly will support in the technology side, but the way that our technology supports is with the intent of helping the people and helping in developing the processes. So as a result, what happens is, we have a situation in which what our customers say is we're the most robust grants database that they've ever used, and they've used several, or they're the best site that for grant research literally changed their grant seeking life, the definitive database for grant research, the hammer in the toolbox that you turn to when you just need to get a job done, or the one, grant research database and time saver. So the next two sections, what we're going to do is for the folks that are newer to Instrumentl that have never tried us, we're going to go through the process of getting a list of personalized good fit funders. I'm going to ask that folks bear with me for a couple of customers that are in the room today, but you might learn a thing or two in my project setup as well, because I'll share a couple tips and tricks that you can use for more intermediate or advanced ways to find good fit funders. But really, when we're talking about how to get a personalized list of good fit funders, the easiest way is with Instrumentl. There are some alternatives like Google, funder websites, 990 forms through GuideStar and the IRS site. But really, the reason why Instrumentl can be super useful is because it's something in which we will automatically look through active grant opportunities for you when we go through the funding opportunity matches section. And so the reason why that's super useful is because that means that you don't have to comb through asking yourself whether or not this is even an active opportunity or not an active opportunity. And so that can already save you a ton of time and differentiate yourself from some of the other tools that you may have used in the past, like a newsletter or an email list and things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop into the Zoom chat for folks that don't already have an account. There is a link you can use there. We're going to wait a few minutes as I walk folks through this initial project setup process. If you already have an account, I ask that you sit tight for about 5 minutes or so as I run people through this project setup. And what I'll do is I'll also do this with folks so that you can kind of follow along with me. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this link. And then I'm going to go ahead and open this up in a new window here. All right, so when you land on this page, just go ahead and create your free account here. You're going to have 2 weeks to check out these results and whatnot. I am just going to make account for myself here. And then you're going to select whatever your operating revenue is for your organization. Select yes for 501c3 status, since that's who we serve. And then from there, once you're there, you can schedule a strategy consult if you'd like, but you want to probably schedule something a couple of days from now. That way you can talk to our team later after you've digested things from this workshop. From my perspective, I'm not going to take one of your guys' spots, so I'm just going to skip this step. What we're going to do from here is we're going to start setting up our project. So this project setup is going to be a dedicated workspace where we're going to be able to actively maintain a search of grants for whatever initiative we're trying to fundraise for, while also track everything in the same place as well. And so the first thing that I'm going to answer is where my organization is registered. In this case, I'm going to say that I'm an after-school tutoring program in Los Angeles County, California. You can choose your fiscal year if you're on a different cycle, but once you're done with that, you can save and continue. And then from here, what you're going to want to do is go ahead and name your project. So when you've gone ahead and named your project, you can be really specific, or you can do it based off of, a broader organization name. If you're working, for example, as a grant writer for a variety of different clients, you might name it after your clients. But if you were actually in that case, you would actually want to have selected that you signed up as a consultant, because we have a new consultant plan that allows you to create different client profiles. But essentially from here, for the project name, I'm going to do tutoring program STEM, and then I'm going to select nonprofit, and then I'm going to select no for faith-based grants, and from there, save and continue. From here, for the areas that your project serves, what you want to do here is you're going to want to select the different communities that your work impacts. So in this case, we're looking for things in California. So I'm going to select a couple of the counties here. And then for fields of work, I'm going to think about a few different keywords of mine that might be interesting. This is where I'll go into the browse all categories section and then expand out the education section to essentially select 3 to 7 fields of work that are interesting to me. So I'm looking for things like after school, summer educational programs, probably STEM education is something that's interesting to me. So I'll look for that. Tutoring and mentoring. And I think I'm going to be mostly a middle school program, so I'll select that. And then from here, I'm going to select what my funding is for. So I'm looking for project program as well as general operating expenses. That way we are able to get some flexible grants overall in that general operating expense section. And if you have any minimums, you can set that in place. In this case, I'm going to set the minimum at 1,000 or more. So once you click that save and exit button, what I'd like you to do is let me know in the Zoom chat so I know where the new folks are at. That way I'm not going too far ahead. And if you have anybody on your team, like the 20% of you all that have 3 or 4 team members, you can definitely invite your team members here to your account. And then click the all done button. And when you're here, what will happen is you're going to see 295 grants for you, or for your case, it might be a different number. But once you get to this screen where it's the let's go button, give me a thumbs up in the Zoom chat so that I just know that we're not going too far ahead and that the folks that are newer to the platform are able to catch up here. And while you guys are doing that, I'm just going to read through the chat to catch up and make sure that we haven't missed anything as well. So definitely some lamenting in terms of Katie and Lisa talking about how bandwidth is definitely always lacking. There's 1,523 other tasks involved. Makes sense. That's definitely something we often hear about. Anna just gave me the first thumbs up. Thanks so much, Anna. Sergio, the link is in the Zoom chat. I'm going to reshare it. It's just in case you weren't able to see that. Mary Elizabeth just gave me a thumbs up. And so take your time, Sergio. And remember, this is being recorded and we will be sending this afterwards to folks. So don't worry if you're kind of taking your own pace there. If you want to edit your fields of work, great question, Tony. What you can do is when you're in your project, in the top right corner, you're going to see this edit project button. And that's where you're going to see in the second step, the project details. And if you just scroll on down to the second section, you're going to see the fields of work that you first selected. So in the case where you already have an account, I always recommend, once every quarter or so, to check out this section because our content team works really hard and they're always adding new grants and as well as new categories. And so you might have missed something the first time that you ever set up a project. And so if you ever are confused about what we mean by some of these categories, feel free to hover over that letter I and it'll explain exactly what's falling into that category. Thanks for the thumbs up, Brittany, as well as Sheba. I'm going to wait for one or two more, and then we're going to keep on going in terms of some of the ways that you can use this for your personalized list of good fit funders. All right, eBurnett just gave me a thumbs up as well. So I'm going to keep on going, but if you're a little bit behind, don't worry. Take your time. Like I said, this is being recorded. You're going to be able to watch it on replay afterwards later today. All right. So what you're going to find in the funding opportunity matches section is you're going to find a list of good fit funders that are open and active opportunities. So these are going to be grants that I could actually start pursuing today if I wanted to. And what is really nice about this is that it essentially shortlists things based off of the fields of work that we told Instrumentl to look at, as well as our organization's profile. So in the case where you ever want to dig a little bit more deeply into some of these things, what you can do is you can sort things based off of best match or by deadline and amount and newness. And you can also filter things down based off their funding use and their funder type. So in the case, for example, where I know I'm really good at applying to private grants, and that's kind of my specialty, I can just filter for the 96 private grants that there are for me here. And so this is super useful when it comes to just making sure that I always have an active grant search open, because what I can do on Instrumentl is I can actually set up more than one project. So maybe I have this STEM program, but I've also got a literacy program on the other side of my nonprofit. Well, what's cool about this is that when I set up different projects, Instrumentl will help me organize all of those different initiatives into unique searches. And then every single week when there's a new grant that potentially falls into my project, I will be notified about those opportunities. And then what's also nice about these sorts of things is that, when there is more detailed information about the funder, as you can see here with the National Environmental Education Foundation, you can click the View 990 report section. And this is where you'll see things like the key people, the giving trends, and everybody that just signed up also has our plus plan activated for them. So you'll see all these features. And these can just be helpful for you when it comes to assessing, whether or not this is actually a good fit funder. So in this case, you can see that I've got this funder who has given a lot to California organizations. And so that's definitely something that resonates well with my organization that's based out of Los Angeles. And so what I might do is I might save that and then leave it into my researching section. Andrew asked if we have a customer service phone number. If you want to contact our customer support, you can contact us in the bottom right corner in the chat bubble, and then we can schedule a time for you to jump onto a Zoom call and definitely walk you through whatever you need help on. But from here, for the folks that are already experienced with Instrumentl, two other things that I'll share with you is our funder matches as well as our quick find. So for folks that are newer, later on today, log back in here, check out your funding opportunity matches and save a couple opportunities that are interesting to you. But for the folks that are a little bit further along, they're looking for potentially even more funders to look at, I definitely recommend you check out our funder matches section, which is going to detail for you some good opportunities for you that may be invite only or may not have an active grant opportunity for you. So I'm going to log into my other account here. But what you can see here is that if I've got this STEM education project here and I go into my matches section, you can see how in this particular project, I have 63 new grants since the last time I went here. And then in my funder matches section, what I'm being shown is a few other opportunities that might be worth my while in terms of adding it to my backlog of folks to potentially reach out to or start to build relationships with. And in the case where you've never tried our Plus plan out before, we do have those customer only events that are coming up on the calendar. RSVP for those, because I know that Amelie would be happy to help you out there and giving you a try there. And then the other thing that I tell folks is reverse search is super powerful as well. In the case where you want to look up an organization similar to yours, you can do so, as I've done here with a nonprofit that I've worked with in the past. I know that they receive a lot of funding from grants, about $1 million every single year. So what I can do is I can go to the past awards received section, and this is going to show me another list of good fit funders that might be good fits for me. So the reason why this is useful is because maybe there is a local organization similar to yours that you want to check out, and you can see exactly what foundations are funding them. All right. So that's just some stuff in terms of how to find a personalized list of good fit funders. We have in our follow-up freebies for today an entire workshop where we dig into this much more in depth. We go through exact questions you should ask yourself. For the sake of time today, we don't have the luxury of going over everything there, but I just wanted to set folks up for the ones that have never, set a search up before, just so that you have something tangible that you can leave this workshop with for your nonprofit. Let's jump back into the presentation and now talk about how we can stay on top of important grant deadlines. So I've got another poll for you guys in terms of whether or not you are currently using a grants calendar. So go ahead and type in your response or select your response rather using that poll question. And then let's see what folks have to say there. Awesome. I'm going to wait for a couple more, but it looks like most folks have gotten their responses in. Holly's sharing that she uses their donor database functions to track and schedule. Stephanie uses Trello. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share these results. And as you can see here, 32% of you currently use a grants calendar, but only you use it. 19% of you have the whole team on it. That's definitely the sweet spot of what everybody wants to get to. 3% of you struggle to constantly update it and so aren't really using it. And then 46% of you, so pretty much 1 in 2 of you guys today, are not currently using one. All right. So that's great to know in terms of just context, because as you can imagine from this section, when it comes to how to stay on top of important grant deadlines, our best piece of advice is to build a grants calendar, right? And so what is a grants calendar? Well, a grants calendar is ultimately where you're going to track current and past grant applications in the same place. This is going to be home to all important information to stay strategic about your grant seeking, right? And so that's going to be something that's going to be really important for you. The right-hand side here, you're going to see our new calendar view that we just released yesterday. I'm going to dig into that a little bit later today. But in the case where you're already a customer of ours, definitely check out Amelie's workshop from the customer only event. She'll dig super deeply into this respectively. But there's really 5 reasons why grant calendars are so important. The first reason is because it improves your time management, right? With the grants calendar, you will never miss a reporting or grant deadline, or you'll be able to better plan out tasks and avoid duplicative work across the several team members that are working on your grants, right? So I saw a couple references, for example, of somebody that was using Monday.com. I'm sure that's super useful in terms of just being able to like task out and triage exactly who's doing what. Another reason why grants calendars are important is because it promotes collaboration. This is how you can build transparency across your team, delegate tasks, as well as easily report on goals and share information faster. And then you might also find it useful for building a library of records. If you're finding yourself using a system like a Trello, the reason why that might be challenging longer term is because you're going to potentially run into the case where a lot of the rich metadata is actually in like the comments of the Trello card from the previous year. And so it might be a little bit trickier to start to see things from a reporting level if you start to, track like 20 or 30 grants. But just something to keep in mind if you're using like a more basic setup right now is that we've consistently seen that like as grants scale up, it gets even more unwieldy. And so there reaches a point where an organization definitely needs to like start building that library of records, oftentimes because some new grant writer comes in, or you have a new team member joining your team as a whole, and you just need to get them caught up to speed on all the things that you've done in the past. Fourth thing that's relevant here is that it can really help you elevate your strategic planning. So you can track forward progress and identify areas for improvement along with goal setting for the future. And then the fifth thing is that it can help you create capacity beyond grants or fundraising. So really, when you have a grants calendar in place, it allows you to be a little bit more strategic and effective in just your grants, which then allows you to allocate more bandwidth to other initiatives such as program development and or reputation building. So there's really 5 steps that I would take if you're in that 46% of folks today that are not using a grants calendar, which we again will dig into more concretely in a 60-minute workshop that'll be a freebie for today's workshop for the feedback form. But just to give you the high level here, just so you have something to be able to work with, the first thing is determine what's important to track, right? you're going to want to ask yourself things like, what are the past funding trends from this funder? Who's going to write this grant? What are the submission deadlines, the amount requested as well? Then you're going to want to take stock of your existing relationships. I'm going to include in the Zoom chat this free tracker template as well. But essentially, what you can do, and actually, Celia, if you can include that, that'd be great. But you can use that free grant tracker template in terms of making sure that you just have something to start with if you're in one of those 46 people or 46% of people today that don't have a tracker to start with. And then what you can do is you can shortlist your new opportunities. So earlier today, a good number of you guys set up your new project. What I aim for you to do is to save at least 3 opportunities from your active funding opportunity matches, because those are going to be opportunities that you can actually start to pursue. Once you've done that, you can start to organize your tracker. And this is where you're going to want to take stock of what's rolling and what's not, as well as add task and ownership of different grants. So what I usually recommend for folks is a 75-25 split, in terms of 75% of your deadlines are concrete, whereas the remaining 25% of grants you're working on for this month are rolling deadlines. That will make it so that it is something where you can just keep on queuing through things while keeping yourself flexible enough for the opportunity that might arise from just the project that you've set up. And the fifth thing you can do is you can review and update your tracker. So this is where you're going to want to reflect on what's working, as well as download reports from Instrumentl. And so that'll be really useful when it comes to reporting upwards to your executive director or your board of directors and things like that. Like I mentioned, we have a free 60-minute on-demand class where we go way more in depth in terms of each of these progressive steps. And we even give you tips and tricks for the people that are using our tracker template or using the tracker in Instrumentl. We give you suggestions in terms of the different ways and frameworks you can think about how to use your notes most effectively and things like that. And so that'll all be shared in these slides, but also in the freebies later on today. All right. So now that you have an Instrumentl account, for the folks that are new to us, as well as the folks that are already with us, life is a lot easier, and here's why. With Instrumentl, we are giving you automagical deadline reminders and updates. So every single week, we're telling you about upcoming saved grant deadlines, including opportunities won and lost. Also, we're keeping an active search for new grants. So intelligent matching is always going to be set up for you as long as you keep your project active. And you're also going to be able to get collaboration on a whole new level, because you're going to be able to track ownership and tasks across the entire team. And lastly, along with other features, but lastly, you can generate those customizable reports that will actually work for you, which allows you to look good in front of your executive director and or board of directors that you're on top of things. It's not uncommon for me to hear about the grant writer who is on a single person team, but able to consistently give these reports to their boss on a weekly basis. And essentially their boss always feels like they're on the ball with their grants as a result. We also just released our summer release. And so something that's very exciting for me to share in this workshop is that we have released 4 new features to Instrumentl, including the calendar view, Salesforce integration, improved deadline tracking, which allows us to support multi-step applications, as well as a new consultant plans. So there's really 3 pathways for folks that are tuning in today. The first one is, if you're a customer and want to try these out, definitely contact hello@instrumentl.com. If you create your account today, you already will get to try a lot of these out because they're going to be activated on your account. But in the case where you find yourself as somebody who previously already tried us, but you just already have an expired free trial, Celia will also include in the Zoom chat a link that you can use to sync up with one of our sales team members so that they can reactivate your free trial and walk you through these 4 new features. And so look out for those in the Zoom chat. But essentially, from here, what's really useful here is that I'm going to run through just a quick dive of some of the things that we are going over here. So the first thing is our calendar view. What we've released now is an ability to essentially turn your tracker on Instrumentl into a calendar in just one click. When you do this, what you're going to see is everything that's coming up for you or your entire team with our new calendar view. This will be available on Plus, Pro, and Custom plans. I'm going to showcase this in just a little bit as well. But this is super useful in terms of just having everything in one place. It's pretty much a to-do app, kind of like all in one, because you'll have all the grant information of the 990 information and all that jazz in the same places where you found the grant. Second thing that's really exciting is our Salesforce integration. So for folks that are a little bit later on in their grants, what you'll find here is that you can now stay in sync and stop rekeying data. So with our new integration here, what it'll happen is once you have decided to sync something back into your Salesforce account, Instrumentl will start to automatically sync those back to your Salesforce account on any future update. And so this is something that you'll find on our Pro and Custom plans, but really exciting for the folks that are part of larger nonprofits that may find themselves often having to export a CSV and then import that into their Salesforce instance. We've also released improved deadline tracking. So this is where it's easier than ever in terms of tracking multi-step grant applications. So I'm pretty sure based off my market research that no other grant tool actually differentiates these two things, but you'll often find yourself in a situation where you might have a different deadline for LOIs versus a deadline for a full proposal. And so what we've done is we've leveled up the way that we think about multi-step applications here. And now you can be even more precise towards every one of the major milestones related to these sorts of opportunities. So you can see here with the Doris Day Animal Foundation grant, Instrumentl is automatically picking up for me what are the upcoming cycles for this particular foundation's opportunities, and then also essentially trying to identify for you like which one we believe you are currently working on. And then once you settle on which actual cycle you're working on, you can set up two different deadlines for when you want to submit for your letter of inquiry as well as your full proposal. Super useful in terms of just making sure that you're able to stay on top of every single progressive step of the grant lifecycle, as opposed to previously where this used to just be a single deadline field. And the last thing is that we have a consultant plan. So if you haven't already converted your account to a consultant plan, you're a grant writing consultant in the audience today, definitely feel free to reach out in that bottom right chat bubble and we'd be happy to help you out here. But essentially what you can do now is instead of having to log into like 5 different Instrumentl accounts, which some consultants would have to do before, you can just set up client profiles in which each client profile can be set up to a different project as well as to a unique fiscal year. So that's super useful in terms of just making sure that everything's organized in one account. And the other nice thing with respect to moving to this account type is that you can also have your clients have their own Instrumentl account and not have it count towards your own number of projects. And so if your client has their own individual Instrumentl account, they can just give you permissions to go into their projects and it won't count towards your personal account's project cap and whatnot. So you can learn more later about this using this slide and clicking into the image or watching this video. But essentially, we go more in depth about some of these respective new features and showcase a few of these things. What I want to hear from or just have you reflect on is to think about like, how do you think using a robust tool like an Instrumentl or some other tool might help you level up your process? So going back into that people, process, and technology framework, I want you to start to think about whether or not you have positioned yourself for success in terms of, having something that will support your process through technology. And that's going to give us a nice little segue into the final section for today's workshop, which is where we're going to talk about technology, the last component of our three-legged stool. So think about that question. If you have some thoughts, feel free to share them into the Zoom chat as well, and we can definitely reflect on those together. But let's go ahead and talk about technology, which is the last component of our three-legged stool. All right. So for this, really what we're thinking about here is how to evaluate grant tools. So what I like for folks to share in the Zoom chat is what are the top 2 or 3 things you look for when assessing grant tools? And I'll wait for folks to have a chance to think about that question and type it into the chat. Price, ease of use. Dana's saying cost, ease of use, breadth of opportunities. Mary Elizabeth saying ease of setup, all inclusiveness. Will it do everything that I need it to do? Absolutely. Cost is definitely an important consideration. Katie, price, ease of use, opportunities. Price, ease of use, collaborative use from Sheba. Everything in one place, ease of use. Awesome. These are definitely some great kind of starting pillars for folks to think about. And what I'm going to go over in the next section are like the 5 key pillars that I think if you were to ask 100 grant writers or just in general nonprofit professionals for like what they're looking for in their grant tools, these are probably going to be the things that you'll see. And you'll see that a lot of them overlap with what people have just shared in the Zoom chat. So The 5 factors to consider is first, can it help you find new RFPs and funders? If it can't help you find new RFPs and funders, it's not a grant tool. It's something else. It's usually like a project management tool or something like that. Second thing is like tracking prospect research and submissions. So this really speaks to some of the things that people mentioned in terms of the ability to do everything in one place, right? Collaboration and reporting is also something important because when you think about things from the lens of the people process technology framework, that is an important part of scale. You will never be able to accomplish a new level of scale in terms of grant applications without being able to introduce collaboration into your organization. It's just simply not possible because we are all limited by the same amount of time in a week. And also with that comes reporting, right? In which how easy it is for you to pull the key insights you need to pull about particular opportunities and where you're at. Intuitiveness and likelihood of team-wide adoption. So notice how I have a nuance here. It's not just intuitiveness, which a lot of people mentioned, but it's really talking about what is the likelihood that our entire team is actually going to use this, right? And I think that a lot of people think about it from the lens of ease of use, but I would also encourage you to think about it from the standpoint of, is everybody going to be able to use this, or is this something in which it's just going to be me using it? And the reason why I say that is because it is way easier for you to go to your decision maker, like your board or your executive director, and make a pitch if there are more than one people in your organization that are behind that respective tool, right? It's simply a matter of fact in that when the masses are calling for some sort of new resource to be allocated in terms of the budget, it's much easier when more people are involved. And the last thing is actually related to the thing that some folks have mentioned in terms of price, but I think it's a little bit more than that. It's not just pricing, it's actually robustness of value. Like at the end of the day, when you think about why are people totally fine with Costco's membership every single year, right? Even though Costco is raising their membership by, I think, $5 this year for the first time in a few years. Well, the reason why is because the amount of value that you get back from Costco as a membership is so disproportionate, right? And so it's really thinking about things from the standpoint of what is value and not just pricing. It's taking pricing to a whole nother level in terms of how you think about pricing of these different tools. But what I'm going to do in the next few slides is I'm going to run through each of these 5 factors. I'm going to throw a couple spicy peppers in terms of what I think are like interesting things for our people just from having talked to many different people. And my intention with this section is just for you to start to get your gears trained and like moving in terms of, when you're thinking about whatever grant tool you decide to use in the future, or whatever grant tool you're using today, or whatever grant tool you choose to continue to use, what are the things that are important to you and what's out there based off of what's available. So first thing is, let's talk about finding new RFPs and funders. The biggest and most important things that I think are questions to consider is, does this tool find active RFPs and have RFP profiles? You're going to find with a lot of grant tools out there that they will also show you inactive RFPs. That is a waste of time, because if you cannot quickly isolate for active RFPs, you are probably doubling or tripling your prospecting time. And the time that you could have been spending actually writing and working on actual proposals is now spent doing a task that simply has already been solved for through tooling. And Catherine agrees, it's such a waste of time, right? Second thing that I think is very important is the question to how to actually find good fit funders. So it's really easy, actually, if I'm, for example, an animal welfare shelter, and I just want to find a random list of animal welfare grants. You can go on Google and search for that. But what's important for you to be able to identify is this foundation a good fit for my nonprofit? Is there information about the foundation in terms of what their giving patterns are, exactly what their trends have been in the last few years, and is there a likelihood of them wanting to fund me? Furthermore, you're also going to take a look at how easy it is for you to actually identify other nonprofits that are similar to you. Is it easy for you to reverse search other organizations? So you saw in my earlier example today on the Tutoring Chicago organization of how I was a STEM education program, and I was able to look up an organization similar to myself and then essentially find a new shortlist of good fit funders. And the last things are things that I'm seeing develop slowly in the overall space, but for the most part, it's super important, which is there smart matching to the RFPs and or the foundation profiles? The reason why is because if somebody has figured out the secret sauce or the formula to being able to identify active grant opportunities for you, they've already saved you tons of hours on an annual basis just on this alone and finding new RFPs. So biggest things when thinking about this pillar is think about it from the context of active RFPs, think about it from the context of smart matching, And then from there, you kind of think about the other things that you might find relevant, like funder data and things like that. Second component is tracking prospect research and submissions. So the really cool thing that's happening right now, at least in my opinion, is that we're able to really ask more of our grant tool. And that's something in which when you're looking at, your ability of your grant tool to track prospect research and submissions, I think the baseline table stakes is whether or not you can save prospects and notes and opportunities. You're going to find that on pretty much the bulk of grant tools these days. That is not really that interesting. But what is interesting is there a submission tracker or a grants calendar view, right? Is there something in which you're getting automatic deadline reminders in which if you found that opportunity and you haven't revisited that funder website, the resource or the tool is constantly updating you? And that naturally leads me to that next question, which is, hey, the funder just changed the deadline. Is it looking out for you, or do you have to look out for everything yourself? Because when we're looking at, the 20% of folks that were pretty much saying that process was the strongest, and the only other 20% that were saying that technology was the strongest, this could be stronger just by choosing the right tool when it comes to your grant tools. And the last thing is just like, can you actually manage the grant pipeline across all of the stages? So it's not just having like something like a Trello, for example, is great for this case, because in a Trello, you can definitely set up like the different pipeline views and kind of move it across the stages. But something like, where it's a simple sort of spreadsheet might have its limitations, because in that particular example, everything might be a little bit more manual, a little bit harder to visualize across the board, things like that. Third component is really thinking about collaboration and reporting. So this is where you really want to think about somebody beyond just like yourself in the team, but just the broader organization, right? Can this tool support more than one user? A lot of grant tools out there don't support more than one user. So you're having to share a login. Here's why that sucks. It sucks because in that particular situation, in the case where you want to potentially work on one particular opportunity and you have another person working on another opportunity, you can't actually tell between who did what. And so by having just the ability to have different users allows you to then set up different tasks for different users, as well as be able to have transparency and accountability across your organization. You're also going to want to look at things like CSV reports, PDF reports. How customizable are these? And can you store documents in the same place? Can you set up different tasks? And just in general, like what do things look like overall when it comes to all those nice to have team features? I would say overall, most people don't emphasize this pillar nearly as strongly as some of the other ones, but it's still an important consideration, especially if you find yourself in the case where you're a nonprofit that's really looking to try to increase the number of applications they're getting out every single year. Collaboration becomes an inevitable thing that organization needs to address in terms of their process and their technology. And then something that a lot of people really talked about was intuitiveness and likelihood of team-wide adoption. I definitely agree with this one. And I think that this is something that should not be underweighted. And when you think about this, what you want to think about is, does it help you stay organized, right? Is there a concept of projects where you're able to have a saved grant search and a tracker in the same place? Or do you have to use two different tools for your prospecting and then your tracking and management? Does the tool have a modern user interface? Can you learn it in under an hour? And if the answer to that question is no, then I'm telling you that there's probably something better out there for you. It's also something where you can ask yourself, hey, for the veteran who's been writing grants for 30 years and the newbie on the team who's been writing grants for 1 or 2 years, can they both get value out of this platform, right? It's something in which I think a lot of times this is definitely a deciding point for a lot of people when it comes to choices, in that intuitiveness is a high priority for them in terms of overall adoption. And the last thing really is robustness of value and pricing. So what I would encourage you to think about when you're thinking about it from this lens is, can the tool that you're evaluating eliminate one or more tools you're already using? If you're using a grant tracker coupled with, for example, 10 different email lists about, for free opportunities that are both active and inactive grant RFPs, well, that might be something in which, you can probably eliminate some of that work. And instead of having to go through 15 different sources of truth, you can have one source of truth. And so these are the sorts of questions to ask yourself here, which is like, can your team save a ton of time with this tool? A good example is like, you can ask this question from any grant tool you're potentially researching, but on Instrumentl standpoint, we consistently see that each team member is saving 12 hours a month. And so what I usually tell people when they're thinking about price and value is, what does 12 more hours on your team mean on an annual basis? And now apply that across the entire team, right? And then also, I think it's really important to be able to experience the value proposition of that product during its trial period. Or do they even offer a trial? Because I think that you should always be able to get value out of the product before you actually decide to commit to invest in that tool. So when you do think about things from these 5 criteria, I think you really have yourself like the best tool for you. And I'm going to outline for you just like 2 clear steps you can take to do from here in terms of if you're in the awareness phase of just like considering grant tools, or you just got introduced to it today. What I would encourage you to do is to do your own due diligence. And then secondly, prioritize what your organization values. Set aside an hour with your team to just have people list out and answer those questions of, what do we value from these 5 pillars? What do we want to rank order as the top 1 to 10 things? And what you'll have is an example of what this person did, and he shared it with me. But essentially, he recently went to his board for approval for a budget, and from here, he compared different grant tools that he was looking at, and he made an informed decision for himself. And so if you ever need help in terms of these sorts of things, definitely feel free to check out instrumentl.com/compare. We have a ton of resources for you as well to just make sure that you make the right choice, whether that is us or some other tool. I just want to make sure that you have a framework in mind so that when the time comes, like you will feel really confident about the choice that you're making. 3 learning takeaways for today. First one is a strong 3-legged stool is really crucial for your grant success. If you don't have people or process or technology, then it's something in which you have to gradually be working on leveling out these 3 component parts for you to be able to scale your grant strategy. Second thing is Instrumentl is your grant fundraising best friend. Take back your time and free yourself from the deadlines. You're going to get automagical deadline reminders once you set up a project on Instrumentl. And also with some new views like the calendar view, you really get to level it up even further in terms of what to expect from your grant tools. And then the last thing is the takeaway on maximizing for value when it comes to choosing your grants tools. I think a lot of people, we speak to hundreds of nonprofits every single week. And the biggest thing that we notice is that they come in with this perspective of like, it's just a grant tool is just like a grant database, when we think it's so much more than that. And hopefully from this workshop today, you can kind of understand how we holistically view the people, the process, and the technology all in one. If you enjoyed this, we have more technically based, hard skill based sort of workshops coming up on the calendar. We will leave a link for the events calendar in the Zoom chat, but we have a workshop on how to write a compelling LOI with Arnisha Johnson this Friday, as well as some other workshops coming up as well. Following up with me, my email is will@instrumentl.com. In the case where you end up enjoying your time on Instrumentl, feel free to use Splash50 to save $50 off your first month, or save 2 months off an annual plan with Splash2Mo. And as I promised folks earlier today, we have a summer 2022 offer. This is something in which you can use the code /special22. And what you'll get is not only the 2 months off an annual plus plan, but also 2 additional users added to your account for the lifetime of your account. So that is something in which typically all of our base plans start at 3 users, but instead you'll get 5 users in that case. And that will only be available for the first 10 accounts that use this code by August 31st. And for my final thing today, lastly, as I mentioned for folks, we do have 3 freebies today. It's 3 hours of on-demand grant writing classes. They are all self-paced. You can schedule a time whenever it works for your calendar. All you need to do is you just need to submit the feedback form that we'll put in the Zoom chat as well. And from there, you'll be able to get access to those courses and things like that. So I had a couple questions, so I'll definitely answer some of those. Farrell, thanks so much for sharing that you should save more than 12 hours a month from using Instrumentl. That's definitely something in which we really pride ourselves in the amount of time that we're saving folks. And we're happy to hear that you've definitely had that time realization. Charlene asked, how do we find out pricing for the paid plans? Yeah, so the pricing for the paid plans can be found on instrumentl.com/pricing. I'm going to put in a link in the chat. So www.instrumentl.com/pricing. And in terms of our Salesforce plan, that is on our pro as well as our custom plans. And so you can check those out in terms of that side of things. I got a question from Martha in terms of, what are RFPs? Those are active grant opportunities from foundations that are essentially asking for folks like you, nonprofits, to submit proposals to their funding opportunity. And keep those questions coming in. A few other things I wanted to highlight for folks is just some of these features in live. So summer release was a big release for us. We've been working on these for a while, talking to a lot of customers along the way. So just to kind of show you an example here, I've got this air quality project, and what I can do is I can click my calendar, and now you can essentially see how everything's in the same place. We have this tracker view, but in a single click, I'm able to essentially see all the different things that are coming up on my calendar. What's really cool about this is that when you save an opportunity on Instrumentl, even if I haven't set a deadline in place, it'll visualize for me when the next funder deadline is. That way, I can essentially know, hey, I've got this due today, and I haven't actually set a deadline for this, but because I have it in my researching stage, I know that I have to start working on this particular thing. So super useful in terms of just visualizing things. And this also applies at the overall account level. So with this new calendar view, you can have like what I have here, the 10 million projects on the left-hand side. And you can click calendar, and now you see everything all in one place. And you can not only see things in one place, but you can also actually assign and manage all of your tasks here too. So if you just click directly in here, you can just go ahead and click in and then directly manage the tasks that you have coming up in place here too. So that's a super great way for you to just stay organized in terms of everything here. And yes, Martha, the calendar view is on our plus plans only. And so that's something that's super useful for the calendar view. Something I want to also showcase is the Salesforce integration. So new in the bottom left corner, you're going to see an account integration section. The first time that you set up your account, you're going to authorize Salesforce access in terms of the API there. You're going to map your funder data. And this is where you're then going to be able to map the information that you want from Instrumentl into your Salesforce account. And then you're going to map the funding opportunity data. And once you've done that, what you will have is when you're in your particular project. So if I want to go back to my project here, what you can see is if I want to link to Salesforce, the very first time that I ever link it to Salesforce, I will need to select this because what Instrumentl needs to know is, do you actually want us to do this for you? Otherwise, you would just be like linking every single piece of information on the planet of what you're saving on Instrumentl. And so in this case, I'm creating a new account, and I'm creating a new opportunity. I click confirm. And once that's done, what will happen is now you can see it is synced to Salesforce. So any future change that I make to this particular grant will dynamically change my Salesforce account. And if I ever want to stop that linkage later on, I can click the unlink button, and then that one will apply there. Third feature I wanted to showcase from the summer release, application cycles. You can actually see a perfect example right here that I showed in my slides earlier. You see here, you have new deadline, better deadline management. You got all these cycles coming up. And so what I can select is the cycle that I believe that I'm going to be working on, which is going to be the October 30th cycle. And now you can see how I have the ability to set two different deadlines in terms of when my LOI is going out, as well as my full proposal as well. And so now I'm able to track all of that and more. Again, now you can see how the tracker is leveled up. It is no longer just a single date, but it is actually the whole view of the multiple steps in that application proposal. And you'll also see how like when I haven't selected a cycle, Instrumentl is flagging for me that I should do so. That way I can start actively tracking things. And then the last thing is on consultant plans. So the best way to probably show that is probably going to be in a dummy account. So what you'll do is when you're creating your account on Instrumentl, like you see here, Instrumentl 1, 2, 3. You're going to select grant writer and or grant writing agency, 501c3, and then you're going to select more. And then from there, once you create your account, you'll then be able to set up your client profiles. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go into that flow, but it's pretty self-explanatory, and I think that you'll be able to figure that out. Other questions. Dana asked if we interface with other programs like Zoho. We do not. Salesforce is our first integration, but we are definitely going to be building more. And so definitely submit that request because it's going to be dependent on like what people want us to build next, really. And that's one of the biggest things that you'll notice with us as a company as well is we are constantly shipping in terms of new features and new value. And so definitely keep your eyes peeled there. I know that Blackbaud's in the conversation as well as some other common CRMs there. And same question there in terms of re-NXT. That's all I've got for today. Thank you so much for attending. Hopefully you got a lot of value out of the session. Hopefully you're able to follow along in those on-demand classes. And yeah, hopefully we see you guys on Friday for how to write a compelling LOI with Bernicia Johnson. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye now.